Hi, my name is Dr. Nathan Mellor, and I want to take a moment to talk with you about some challenges that you may be facing for developing strategy in times of uncertainty. And I really want this to be something where we can just talk. These are tough times, and there's a lot going on. And as a leader, your ability to process what's happening and process what's coming is really compromised. And so I want to walk you through some thoughts that I hope will be helpful to you, and something that I hope will be able to help you in turn be able to assist in leading your organizations. A few years ago, you saw the rise of the phrase VUCA, V-U-C-A, VUCA. It came from the United States military, and it was really a description about complex situations in which it was hard to develop strategy. And so the VUCA world, you started hearing things about the VUCA world. And back then, when it was introduced, we thought we understood it. Today, we are living in it. And I want to describe this to you because I hope it will be helpful to you. And so looking at the VUCA world, the reason why it is valuable and significant to you is because it helps you predict the results of your actions, and it also helps you determine how much you know about the situation. So if I'm looking at what we're trying to do along this line, we will talk about my ability to predict the consequence of my actions. And along this line, we're really going to be looking at how much do you know about the situation that you are in. So on this side, I'm going to what I know. On this side is what I can predict. And the VUCA world is broken down into these quadrants. On one side, we're looking at volatility. On the other side here, we're looking at complexity. Down here, we'll look at ambiguity. And then over here on the far right, we'll look at uncertainty. Volatility, complexity, ambiguity, and uncertainty. And I am probably writing too fast. I hope that you can read that, but I want to get this recorded and get it out to you quickly. So if I'm looking at the four parts of the VUCA world, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, we see that what's happening when we're trying to develop strategy is that each of these things makes it more difficult to be able to see the future, to think about the future. So if I'm looking at complexity, this is really the description of this is when you have a situation that has a lot of interconnected parts, variables, where it has a lot of moving parts, where some of the information we know, but it's difficult to predict what's going to happen. This would be when the volume or the nature of the situation is overwhelming to process. What does all of this mean? Well, it might be that you are doing business in numerous locations that have different challenges. Maybe I own a restaurant chain and I'm dealing with those chains, some of my stores in California, dealing with one thing because of the crisis that we are currently going through. The stores in Florida are another, the stores in Georgia another. Because of that, there's a lot of complexity, just because of the interconnected nature of it. Now, in our businesses, whether you're running a business, a nonprofit, a church, pick whatever it may be, that complexity right now is very high, because what's happening in a health crisis is impacting an economic crisis, which is impacting you on a personal level, professional level. Every part of our lives is now being drawn into this, and so it's very complex. So when we say, how do we fix this? We see the stock market collapsing. We see business drying up. What do we do? And that's where that complexity comes into play. So if I'm trying to develop a strategy of where to go next, this becomes a problem, because as that complexity goes up, my ability to predict is challenged. Let's look at the next part of it on VUCA, volatility. So over here I've got volatility, and this is when the challenge is unexpected. We weren't anticipating this. There's been a disruption in the market. It might have been from a competitor. It might have been from something that happened internally. Often it's not that it's difficult to understand, but it is very disruptive. We know what's going on, but it's still disruptive because there's no pattern. Volatility means that there isn't a constant speed. There are variations. And so I'm looking at this and I think it's this, but I can't see a pattern emerging. So I find that I'm going up and down and up and down, and I don't know how to predict what's coming next. The scale of it may be part of this. But what I'm dealing with here is that it's difficult to discern this is like what we've dealt with in the past, and it's disrupting me. This is when the price fluctuates. You see the price of oil not very long ago at one price, and now it's at another price, and it's being disrupted for a host of reasons, which goes back to the complexity. So I have complexity and I have volatility, and it's going up and down, and I can't predict where it's going next. And so for a while, every morning, people who might have money in retirement in the stock market, they're looking at the TV and they're wondering what's going on. They're looking at their phones and seeing the ups and downs in the market, and they feel this volatility. How long can we endure this? The next one is ambiguity. Ambiguity over here is when there's no roadmap. We've not been here before. It's unprecedented. And in these moments, the causal relationship of why is this happening is still relatively unknown. It feels foggy. I remember driving once in one of our national parks. I was driving up to Yosemite National Park, and we began making our way up these very curvy roads. And as we got farther up the side of this mountain, the fog began to roll in, and it became thicker and thicker. And so what do you do when you can't see very far, when you feel that sense of haziness, the fogginess, the ambiguity? We tend to tighten up, we stress, and we slow down. I'm not sure what I'm up against yet. And so in this, we're trying to figure out, what do we do? Do we move into a new category? Do we launch a new product? Do we sit still? What do we do? And so you're seeing a lot of people right now, because the fog has rolled in, they are slowing down, tightening their grip because they're unsure of where we're going to go next. And the last one is about uncertainty. Uncertainty. So I have volatility, I have complexity, I have ambiguity, and then finally uncertainty. And this is a tough time because the past in these situations is not a good predictor of what is to come. When I'm dealing with uncertainty, that's in the present. The present is unclear, and there are no concrete trends, no patterns, and I'm not sure where to go. We've got somebody else coming into our market. I've got people leaving the field. I maybe have a customer who said that they wanted to do something a week ago. We were about to close on it, or maybe you even closed on it, and now it doesn't seem that that's going to happen. You don't know what to do. You don't know where to prioritize. You could change course. You know the cause and effect, but it's unclear where to go. You're uncertain. Now, normally when I'm talking with leaders, we might have one or two of these things in play. Right now, we have all of them in play. So what can you anticipate as a leader? Confusion, feeling a bit overwhelmed. And so there's a reason why this idea of VUCA came from the military, because it's a very confusing environment. It's difficult to see, it's difficult to know what to do. And so I want to walk through a few of the suggestions that are there, and then I'm going to give you a really quick overview of how to develop strategy. So if I'm looking at all of this, and I'm saying, okay, right now I have uncertainty, the past is not a good predictor of the future. So what do we do when we have uncertainty? This is the time in which I must invest in information. I have to collect ideas. I have to be able to listen to other people. I have to be opening the lines of communication, because if I can't get the information, then I'm going to remain uncertain. This is where leaders provide inspiration. Let me tell you where we're going to go. This is why we want leaders in times like these who say, this is where we are, this is where we're going to go, and they say it with a level of certainty that gives us a sense of direction and hope. But in times like these, what am I wanting? I'm wanting better information. I'm wanting more data. I'm wanting to understand what's happening. I'm getting analysis. So what do we find ourselves doing? We find ourselves reading more and more articles. We're talking to people. We're trying to get some type of insight. Now, in that moment, as a leader, you are the broker of information. You are collecting it. What is going on here? What is the actual issue? I'm trying to deal with this uncertainty. I'm not trying to manage the uncertainty. I'm trying to lead through the uncertainty. Where do we want to go now? And so what do I need from you as a leader? I need for you to recognize that that uncertainty is not the luxury, perhaps, that you have. Where would you like to go? So looking at this, I'm looking for better information. What's happening? I'm not going to have all the information I want. And let me be clear. This is why there's a difference between leaders and managers. This is not just a problem to be managed. This is something that we have to lead through. Where do you want to go from here? Because people are standing around asking, what are we going to do? Where do we go? Now, you may chart the course, and it may be the wrong course. And then what do you have to do? I have to adjust the course. But as a leader, you're trying to provide people some way out of this time of uncertainty by giving them a sense of direction. So looking back at ambiguity, when I don't know what to do, there's no roadmap. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be testing what's happening around me. I'm going to be launching this idea and that idea and that idea. I'm trying to get people back into creative mode. If you've ever read Malcolm Gladwell's stuff, you know how he describes a lot of this. That your brain can work in survival mode or it can work in creative mode, but it can't work in both at the same time. It's a lot like a gear shift. I can work in creative mode or survival, but not both. So what happens when we go into survival mode? What happens when you get a phone call from someone that tells you that the person that you love has been injured, they are sick, maybe they've passed away? The entire world comes right here. You're trying to survive the moment. You're not thinking about what's happening tomorrow or 2 weeks from now or a year from now. You're trying to get through the minute, the hour, the day. So what am I dealing with here? I'm dealing with that ambiguity of I don't know what to do. And so what do I have to do? I have to push back. Now, one way to do that, when I'm doing coaching, one of the things I'm going to ask people to do is I'm going to use what's called the miracle question. By some miracle, you woke up tomorrow and all of this was better. Tell me what's happening there. The example that was given to me when I learned about this, the person said, what would happen if everything was better? The loved one that has passed away would be back. Well, what do? We start looking at, then what is it that is making you feel the way that you feel? And then they might say loneliness. I wouldn't be lonely if they were here. So what if I'm going to say the same thing with your company, with your organization? I want you to imagine this. Tomorrow morning, you wake up and things are better. The biggest challenge that you are feeling right now has been addressed. What is different tomorrow? Now, what am I trying to do? I'm trying to get that gear shift to move from survival into creative. I'm trying to bypass the past without discarding it, but I'm trying to leapfrog it to think about today and the future specifically. So in that moment, I'm trying to create a picture of where do you want to go. And so what am I doing in this moment? I'm asking you to experiment a bit. What would it be like if we did this? Can you imagine what it would be like if we had that? And then I'll put this into action in here in a moment when we talk about the strategy, but I'm trying to create this ability to start pinging, to determine what's out there, what works and what doesn't work. Because what happens to leaders, and the reason why leaders and managers do have to work together eventually, is that leaders tend to only look for what is broken. They are drawn to what is broken. And they may not do an inventory that includes what's working. And so you have to bring the two worlds together. So help me understand what this looks like if it's working. What experiments can I put together to be able to bring this to light? So a lot of people right now are having important meetings in which they're discussing what are the options for the future. I've got to keep that open. I've got to have that dialogue, open communication that leads to greater clarity along the way. Looking at complexity, let me go to volatility first. If I look at volatility, this is that up and down. I'm being just this whipsaw back and forth. It's too much. So what am I trying to do? I'm trying to get rid of this up and down. I'm trying to build in the slack needed where I'm not feeling that full weight up and down. I'm bringing this back tighter. It's a lot like when I was a kid and maybe we had a car that didn't work and Dad would get that car behind the truck and we would have this rope. And if you pulled that rope too hard, it would just jar both of them. We tried to get up to speed slowly and keep that slack there and just enough so that we weren't just being pulled around. So what am I trying to do? I'm trying to do something a little bit different. I'm trying to build in the slack needed for there to be some room. I'm trying to create the parameters and work within it. So in that moment, if I recognize that I'm in this volatility and I'm just being pushed up and down, up and down, up and down, what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to start stockpiling inventory. So what do we do in our homes? Why are the shelves in our grocery stores empty? Because people are trying to deal with volatility. What are they saying? I'm not going to feel this sense of disruption if I can have enough food at home. What are we trying to do? We're trying to manage the volatility by building in more margin. And so what am I asking for from leaders? Volatility. I'm trying to build in some margin in your life. So what do we need to do? I would be saying we've got to take care of you as a leader so that you can take care of other people. If you're not sleeping right now, you're not creating enough room, and that volatility will tear you apart. In our companies, the same. Here's what I'm hearing people say. We just got to get through the next month. We just got to get through the next 6 weeks. The challenge of making that margin so thin is that there's no room for error. So I'm asking you to make the harder choices. Make the harder choices to reduce that uncertainty, to reduce, to provide remove the ambiguity, to provide the inspiration that gives people a sense of where we're going. And then on the volatility, I'm asking you to invest in what's needed. Stockpile. So if I'm looking at your organization and say, what is it that you're going to need to get out of this? Maybe what I'm doing is I'm making the hard decisions to increase what I have on the cash on hand so that I can ride this thing out. But we have to focus our effort here on investing in what is needed. So imagine this. We are walking through the aisles of a grocery store and we've been told that we might be quarantined for a time. What are the things that you're going to need in your home if you get stuck there for a while? Would you do better by focusing your efforts or just grabbing whatever you see? So if I'm looking at this volatility, how do I reduce the volatility? I identify what I need and I invest in that. So do I sleep better at night if I have a few days worth of food already ready? Well, of course. So what's happening in your organization right now? I've got to identify what's causing the volatility. For most organizations, that's going to be cash flow. For others, that volatility is going to be they have been inundated with work. And now they've been inundated with work and they are in a unique spot where they're trying to hire as fast as they can. They're trying to get the things done to get them out back to the people who need them. Well, that volatility is still there. It is a disruption. So what am I trying to do? I'm trying to create the guardrails. I'm going to invest in what I need. I'm going to not worry about some of the long-term implications. I'm going to deal with what's happening right now to lower that volatility so we can make a better choice. more, hiring of more talent. I'm going to get what I need. Now, these steps can be expensive. You buying the food that has been freeze-dried is going to be more expensive than you buying some of the other food. But what are you dealing with? Volatility. The answers here tend to be the more expensive answers, but they create the space needed often that are in alignment with the level of risk required. Let me say this very carefully. If the volatility that you have is financially based, then you're going to have a financially based solution. I've got to focus my efforts. So if I'm walking into the store and I'm trying to reduce volatility at home, I'm going to purchase the things that are going to allow the family to feel more like they have what they need. It lowers the stress level. And then the final one here is managing the complexity. When I'm managing the complexity, that means I might have to restructure. In the past, maybe the main push for the company was sales, and now there's not a place to do that. In other places, maybe I've got to increase my manufacturing capacity. I've got to do X, Y, or Z. What am I trying to do? What I'm trying to do here is be open to restructuring based upon the new need. I've got to change the way that things were built, how resources were being used. For example, if I'm working at a university right now and I'm shifting so much of what we're doing into an online education opportunity, I can't use the existing structure to get that done if the structure was not designed for that. I may have to reassign resources. I have to reorganize, restructure to provide what is needed in that world. Talking to deans in the recent weeks, what is their great concern? They're trying to respond to what is the need for the faculty. Well, how do I need to restructure to respond to that need? Because they're trying to provide the access to the faculty who can take care of the students and down the line. So I have to be open to restructure if needed. I'm looking at the resource allocation. Where do I need to put things in response to what's happening to me in the present moment? So I take all of this and I'm looking at, I've got uncertainty. What am I uncertain about? What's the ambiguity about? The complexity, the volatility. I'm going to ask you to go down and say, okay, looking at these 4 different areas, describe where we are so that we have more information to be able to give a good diagnosis. Now, at the heart of all strategy is the ability to diagnose well. Diagnostics. The book that I have found helpful on this was by Richard Rummelt. It's called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, The Difference and Why It Matters. Richard Rummelt, R-U-M-E-L-T. The book is Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, in which he is looking at a handful of things that are required for good strategy development. I'm going to give this to you literally in 2 minutes, and I hope it will be hopefully it will be helpful to you as you are developing your strategy moving forward. When is strategy needed? There are a lot of good definitions on this. I'm going to give you mine real quickly. Strategy is needed when you do not have the ability to overwhelm your opponent, the situation, by just showing up, by sheer force. If I have an NFL football team playing a high school football team, they do not need strategy. They show up and they just run over the opponent. But if I have 2 good NFL teams made up of professional athletes, they are going to have a strategy that allows them to compete, to win. Now, what you'll find is that strategy is dependent upon who you're playing, but it's also dependent upon who you have on your team. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to find what is the best path forward that allows us to have the greatest chance of success. So I'm going to develop a strategy that looks at my strengths, those weaknesses, and then I'm going to use that strategy to be able to give me the best outcome possible. This is why often the team that is not the most talented team wins, because they had a better strategy. I need strategy when I don't have the ability to just overwhelm my opponent. So what do? I start with what Rummelt would call the kernel, the core, the small piece, the kernel of strategy. This would be the fundamental core content. It's the hard nut at the core of it, and it's this is what where we start. So imagine this. Imagine you are a physician, and you have somebody come in. They come into your waiting area. They come into the waiting room, and you talk to them, and they say this: my problem is that my arm hurts. My problem is that my shoulder hurts. Whatever it may be. What they're describing is all the way down to the core idea. This is what's wrong. Now, they may be wrong, they may be right, but I'm listening to them to understand what is happening. And they might say this. A year ago, I went to a friend of mine who is a surgeon, and I said, my shoulder is giving me constant pain. He's an orthopedic surgeon. He did a number of tests. And then we determined, well, it's actually more than one thing. There's more than one thing. But what was my goal? My goal was, can you help my shoulder feel better? If I'm looking at a strategy for war, what is the strategy? Down to the core, to win the war. Now I'm going to get more and more specific, where it is not just descriptive, it's meant to say, what do we do? But if I'm saying, I want to reduce the amount of pain in my shoulder, I have to start by saying, what's the kernel? I want to get rid of that pain. The second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to provide a diagnosis. What's the problem? So any good doctor is going to be great at diagnostics. I am diagnosing what's wrong here. I'm listening. I'm looking at the territory to find out what is happening. I'm trying to understand so that I can make a good decision next. For me, when I went to the doctor, I said my shoulder hurts. I told him that I had had an injury back in the day when I played football, and he looked at that shoulder and he said, all right. Now he said, but it seems as if there might be more than one thing. So we start doing all the diagnostics. And he comes back and he says, we have a pinched nerve in your neck. And then you've got something wrong with your shoulder. And then you've got a problem with your ulnar nerve. Gave me 3 problems. But his diagnostic came back and said, it's not just one thing. And so let's look at the 3. And he starts to develop, from that diagnosis, he starts to develop, how do we respond to this? And this is what he said to me. He sat down with me. He's a good friend. He sat down with me and he said, now there are a number of options we can take right now. And he gives me a handful of options because he says this: I don't want the solution to be worse than the problem. He gave me his guiding policy. The guiding policy: do no harm. Because one of my answers could be, fix my shoulder. There are a number of things that you could do to fix the shoulder that are a lot worse than having your shoulder hurt. So I have a guiding policy. If I'm a physician, do no harm. We don't want the solution to be worse than the procedure, worse than the actual pain that you came in for. And then finally, we create a set of coherent actions. I want to be very specific. So my doctor said this to me: I want you to go take these tests. We're going to come back. We're going to look at this. We're going to take these pills on these days. And here we go down the line. So if I'm looking at your organization, I'm asking first, what is it that you're trying to do? What does this success look like? Right now, some of you are saying to not close the doors. So if I'm looking at what is the goal here, we're trying to develop a strategy that does what? Allows me to be profitable, keeps the doors open, allows us to make it through the next 8 to 12 weeks, to make it through the next 8 to 12 days. What are we looking for? The diagnosis. Why do we have this problem? What is happening? And I'm asking that diagnostic because I'm testing what are the options here, because it may be more than one thing. But I'm asking you to write down, to communicate with the team, what do we think this is? So if I'm dealing with the coronavirus and I'm working in oil and gas, is it just that, or is it the price of a barrel of oil? Is it beyond that? I go a step farther, guiding policy. Let's say the guiding policy to save the company. If I said the goal is to save the company and the guiding policy is, but we want to treat our people fairly, I might have a solution that will emerge. The diagnostics said, well, the issue is you're spending too much money. What do? I can just let everybody go. But the guiding policy would be to say, how do I do that in a way that honors them and respects them? How do I communicate that? And then finally, the set of coherent actions. What is our plan to get back on offense? Or in times, what is our plan to exit as gracefully as possible? Sometimes you do everything you can do, and for reasons beyond you, there are not a lot of good options. And I would say to you, I need you to hear me, just because it doesn't rain, that does not mean you're not a good farmer. Sometimes you can be a great farmer, but if it doesn't rain, you're not going to get very far. Sometimes in business, in nonprofit leadership, and church leadership, the situation that you're in is one that makes it nearly impossible, if not impossible, to succeed. That doesn't mean you're a bad person. That doesn't mean you haven't been a good leader. It means sometimes things happen that are beyond our control that we can't do a whole lot about. So then how do I exit gracefully? I've worked with organizations that didn't make it, but they did it in a way where they did not feel like they had violated their values on the way out. If that's your situation, I am very sorry. Because this is not because of something that you have said or done. This is because of something larger. But I will say this. A big part of succeeding in life is refusing to give up and to earn the right to close those doors. And I would say to you, what have you not yet done that you might try? Earn the right. Because here's what I want. If you have to sit down with people and say it's not going to work, if you have to look somebody in the eye and say we're not going to be able to continue, I want you to have earned the right to do that. Which means you've tried the things that you know to try. And that's all you can ask. That's all you can ask. I appreciate you as a leader. We need you right now. We need you to understand what you're up against and to have the courage to act on that. When people act with character, what emerges is hope. Do what is right. Live according to your values. Be a person of character. And even if you don't find the success that you're looking for in this moment, I guarantee you, in time, you will find that approach to life makes life better for you and the people that you do life with.